Barack Obama became the 44th President of the United States in January 2009. He instantly became a symbol and inspiration for people of colour in America and around the world. In line with his campaign promises, he changed foreign policy in relation to both Iraq and Afghanistan. Obama saw Afghanistan as a bigger threat, and therefore he increased troop numbers there and reduced them in Iraq. In the first 18 months, he increased numbers in Afghanistan from about 40 to 75,000. At the same time, he reduced troop numbers in Iraq from about 150,000 to 50,000. Eventually, only 150 soldiers were left in Iraq to guard the American embassy in Baghdad. By then, Iraq was beginning to function as a proper democracy with its own army and police force. However, by late 2011, ISIS emerged as a more extremist breakaway group from the Al-Qaeda organization. They were led by Abu al-Baghdadi and developed an extreme ideology of jihad, or holy war. They fought against infidels and Western powers in general. They beheaded journalists and published shocking scenes on the internet, gaining them worldwide publicity. They also terrified moderate Muslims who failed to conform to their belief system. At one point, they controlled large areas along the Iraq-Syria border region. Obama responded to this situation by increasing troop numbers in Iraq to 4,500. He also ordered thousands of drone strikes on ISIS military bases. So it was a very unstable situation, with Syrian President Assad fighting a separate civil war against other rebel groups. Assad used chemical weapons in his war against them, despite being warned against such action by Obama. Eventually, Russia brokered a solution with Assad, agreeing to hand over his chemical weapons. The United States also had a difficult relationship with Pakistan during the Obama presidency. Bin Laden and much of the Al-Qaeda and Taliban organizations had moved there in recent years during the Bush presidency. They had constructed several safe haven bases in both Afghanistan and Pakistan. In April 2011, Obama got information that bin Laden was hiding in a compound in Abbottabad. He gave the go-ahead to a unit of Navy SEALs to kill bin Laden. The American military team also captured important computer-based information which helped to fight against future terrorist operations. There was a sense of relief in the United States at the death of bin Laden, but the war against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda was far from over. Both organizations remain powerful, controlling large areas and military bases in both Afghanistan and Pakistan. The US continued to pressurize governments in both countries to fight against terrorists there. Elsewhere in the Middle East, there was also concern with Iran's nuclear power program. Talks with Iran were an ongoing process for years. The United States was mainly concerned about Israel's security and also to maintain balance between the powers in the region. In July 2015, a joint comprehensive plan of action was signed with Iran. 6 nations were involved, and they agreed to lift their economic sanctions against Iran in return for a halt to the nuclear power program there. Obama led this effort, but China, Germany, Russia, the UK and France were also deeply involved. It became known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan. Iran agreed to foreign supervision of its nuclear power program and to get rid of 97% of its uranium. A $1.7 billion economic aid program was also agreed. Like John F. Kennedy, Obama believed that bombs and bullets alone could never defeat terrorism. Investment programs, jobs, and opportunities for young people were also required to give people hope for the future. The deal was strongly criticized by Donald Trump, who later withdrew the US from it. However, the Secretary of State, John Kerry, assured people that the deal guaranteed that the Iranians would never build a nuclear bomb. Like all American presidents, Obama was strongly supportive of Israel. However, the US often found it difficult to get the balance right between support for Israel and maintaining good relationships with their Arab neighbours. The president approved greater levels of cooperation with the Israeli military, but the political situation remained fragile. He asked Congress to fund the Iron Dome program, which gave Israel greater protection. This was a strategic defense system designed to protect Israel from rocket attacks from Gaza and Lebanon. It proved very effective, shooting down thousands of incoming rockets over the years. However, in regard to politics, the Israeli Prime Minister proposed an expansion of the Jewish housing program in East Jerusalem. This was strongly resisted by Palestinians and was also actually opposed by the president. The United Nations condemned the Israeli expansion, but the US abstained from voting. However, in January 2017, the US Congress condemned the United Nations resolution, which showed strong continued support for Israel right throughout the United States. Elsewhere in the Middle East, Libya witnessed a wave of protest in what became known as the Arab Spring of 2011. These protests posed a serious threat to the Libyan leader, General Gaddafi. He had been military dictator of Libya for decades, and over the years he had created a lot of internal and external enemies. By 2011, the protest movements within Libya had begun to undermine his authority. The United Nations also passed a resolution which supported military action. Gaddafi responded actually by calling off a military offensive against rebels. However, in September 2011, the United Nations began a military campaign directly against him, in which the US was also deeply involved. The fighting continued for several weeks, and Gaddafi was eventually surrounded and killed by rebel forces in October 2011. Relations with Russia were also an ongoing situation. In April 2010, Russia and the United States signed a new arms agreement in relation to nuclear weapons. The new agreement replaced the Arms Reduction Treaty of 1991, and both countries agreed to reduce their long-range nuclear weapons by 30%. However, by Obama's second term, Russia was becoming a stronger power and began to assert itself on the world stage. For instance, in 2014, it attacked Ukraine and captured the Crimea Peninsula. The following year, 2015, it intervened in the Syrian civil war and got agreement from President Assad to hand over his chemical weapons. The following year, Russia got involved in the US presidential election, hoping to damage the campaign of Hilary Clinton. President Obama also hoped to improve relations with Cuba. Meetings took place in Vatican City, and Pope Francis was also involved. By then, Raul Castro had replaced his brother Fidel. By July 2015, after 2 years of talks, Obama announced that full diplomatic relations with Cuba would be restored. This was regarded as a major triumph for the president. Obama was also very committed to the protection of the environment. In 2015, he reached a substantial agreement with China in regard to carbon emissions. This agreement led on to the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris 2015. At the Paris conference, 195 countries agreed to monitor their emissions and to develop plans to reduce them. In relation to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Obama had also attempted to negotiate a major trade deal between the US and 11 other countries around the Pacific Basin. This was known as the TPP, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership. However, this idea got bogged down in the 2016 presidential election, with both Trump and Hilary Clinton opposed to the deal at the end. The basic idea behind TP was to create a closer trade relationship between the US and the other nations, to the exclusion of China. The other countries went ahead with the trade deal anyway, although Trump refused to sign it in January 2017. In relation to the domestic economy, Obama became president in January 2009 when the economy was in serious crisis, and he also inherited 2 major wars. Unemployment was near 10%, house prices were collapsing, the banks had colossal negative equity, and major car companies such as Chrysler and General Motors were about to close. George Bush, as president, in fairness to him, had already put in place a major financial relief package known as the Troubled Assets Relief Program. It was designed to transfer hundreds of billions of dollars from the federal government to the banking system. In fact, without such relief, the banking system would have collapsed, bringing the entire economy to a standstill. Obama supported this program, but he also went further. He pushed through the American Recovery and Investment Act of February 2009. Over the 8 years of his presidency, the economy gradually improved and unemployment dropped from 10 to 6%. The bank and car companies restructured their organizations in line with federal aid plans. However, the national debt got worse, reaching almost $20 trillion by the end of his presidency. However, his overall management of the economy is considered one of his best achievements. As President, Obama was also a leading liberal and signed the Same-Sex Marriage Act into law in 2016. He had changed his mind in relation to this issue over the years. Prior to that, he was quite conservative in relation to it. Also, in one of his campaign pledges, he promised to reform healthcare. Healthcare had been a persistent problem in American politics for decades. In fact, going back to Lyndon B. Johnson, who introduced Medicare and Medicaid in the 1960s, but there were very little changes since then. Major companies provided healthcare insurance for their workers, and Medicare and Medicaid looked after the elderly and the disabled. However, that left millions of Americans with no healthcare insurance. Obama planned to change that, but Republicans and the powerful American Medical Association were strongly opposed to his reforms, and they branded it as socialism. The plan would require every American worker to carry health insurance cover. Those who opted out would have reduced tax credits, and therefore paid indirectly for the plan. Also, workers would be able to retain their cover when they changed jobs. Insurance companies would not be able to refuse sick people. Every employee would be charged between 2% and 9.5% of it, depending on their income level. Overall, the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, was a big success and provided an extra 30 million people with healthcare insurance. It was signed into law by the President on the 23rd of March 2010 and was probably his greatest domestic achievement. Barack Obama represented the peak of a long struggle for the African American community in the United States. Great leaders such as Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and indeed Dred Scott contributed to that struggle in the 19th century. They were followed in the 20th century by figures such as Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and Jesse Jackson. They fought for equality and civil rights for people of colour. It was a heroic struggle which lasted more than 2 centuries. Barack Obama was also a great orator and an inspirational figure. His charisma and ability inspired poor people and people of colour in America and around the world.